Today's conversation is with Professor Alex Johnstone, one of the UK's leading researchers in appetite, nutrition, and obesity. Fundamentally, I believe that the GLP-1 medicines and the next generation of obesity therapies that follow them will ultimately prove to be the most consequential medicines ever developed. I think that their impact will be so far-reaching, they're almost hard to imagine. First order, second order, third order effects will really change the way we all live our lives over the coming years and decades. In this episode, we discussed a number of key themes relating to appetite, weight loss, and nutrition. We discussed how appetite's regulated, why maintaining weight loss is so difficult after a period of success, the importance of protein and the role of protein in the feeling of being satiated, ultra-processed foods, something we've spoken a lot about on the podcast so far, and what the future of obesity treatment might look like. We also covered some really interesting concepts defined as the obesity paradox, wherein obesity tends to affect those who are less well off in certain more deprived areas within our country. Truly fascinating stuff. And as the science associated with GLP-1s and the associated medicines within that class continues to develop, our understanding of what regulates appetite and metabolism improves, and this will become increasingly important for clinicians, policymakers, and patients alike. Really enjoy this conversation. Hope to do more on these themes in the coming weeks and months. This is Inside Matters. My name is Dr. James McIlroy. I hope you enjoyed it.
Is breakfast the most important meal of the day?
Breakfast is definitely the most important meal of the day. So my latest research has been looking at something that we call chrononutrition, meaning timing of eating. And that is linked to looking at our physiology in terms of our circadian rhythms. Our circadian rhythm is circa around about 24 hours, roughly. And then how do we integrate what and when we eat into those natural circadian rhythms? So my latest work has looked at when you eat the largest meal of the day. And first of all, some good news for shift workers is that it doesn't matter for energy metabolism when you eat your largest meal of the day, whether it's morning or evening. But it does actually matter that we know that when you eat a big breakfast, you're much more likely to feel full, and much more likely, if your goal is to have a calorie deficit, you're much more likely to stick to that, because there's something about eating a bigger breakfast that is really beneficial at controlling appetite.
And in terms of the timing of your meal, you mentioned it doesn't matter kind of maybe when it is in the day, but does it relate to when you wake up, basically? So is it the sooner, or should there be a gap? What do we understand about waking up and then first meal?
That's interesting, because there is no universal definition of what breakfast is. So I use James Bett's definition. He's based in Bath, which is the first meal of the day within 2 to 3 hours of waking up. So for shift workers, that might be a different time to people who are non-shift workers. And it also is influenced by whether you're a habitual shift worker or whether you're in a rotating shift. So that really messes up with your circadian rhythms. But one more bit of information to add in there is that we know that it's been shown many times that you're much more insulin sensitive in the morning than you are in the evening. So in the UK, most of us eat our biggest meal in the evening, which is when we're least insulin sensitive. That probably is not a wise choice. It's better to front load your calories when you're more insulin sensitive.
And why is insulin sensitivity a good thing?
So insulin sensitivity, insulin is a hormone that helps regulate our blood sugar or blood glucose. And we want that to be not having those peaks and troughs throughout the day, because that is a risk factor for cardiovascular events. So really what you want is the body to be responsive to the type and amount of carbohydrate that you're eating. And that it is most responsive in the morning.
And what about these diets that sort of propose it may be better to fast for a significant period of time? Do they still get the benefit of a bigger first meal, so to speak, even if they don't fit into the kind of 2 to 3 hours after waking breakfast definition?
So there's lots of different types of fasting studies, and I think what you're referring to is like fasting on 2 days of the week and then feasting as it's called, on 5 days of the week. I think that's actually quite difficult. There's not many people who can adhere to a total fast or even a modified fast when they're consuming, 600 calories a day, a very low calorie diet. And that doesn't work for everybody. I was listening to another podcast with Giles Yeo, and he's in Cambridge, he's a geneticist, and he was giving a entertaining account of his experience with that type of fasting. It said that it made him think about food more because he was on a restricted diet. Yeah, so that's just one example of why it doesn't work for everybody. So a modified version of that is time-restricted eating, when you've got an eating window, perhaps 10 hours, 8 hours, that you allow yourself to eat. But remember, all these diets work in the same way, that you're restricting calories. It's just behavioural cues, different strategies that you're using, whether you're counting points, counting hours, counting time, to try and restrict calories to achieve weight loss. So, and if I was going to be doing a time-restricted fast, then I would be eating in the morning. Now, that's quite difficult because it's, it might be easier to think, oh, I'll sleep overnight, though that will count as my fasting hours. I'll have an extended period of fasting in the morning and not have my breakfast. But, I think it's an interesting area that might develop in the future. But myself, I think breakfast, I'm sticking with the ethos that breakfast like a king and dine like a pauper.
Yeah, and that phrase you just had there, the breakfast like a king, dine like a pauper, quite an old saying, isn't it? It dates back to hundreds of years ago, perhaps.
So it was Maimonides, who was a Jewish physician, and he shared his learnings about what contributes to a good, long and healthy life. So as with all myths, there's a nudge of evidence in there. So.
Now, with regards to breakfast, so to speak, you've published and presented some very interesting work on what you eat, as well as when you eat being important. And I was recalling just before we started the podcast, a presentation you did somewhere else talking about the most popular breakfast in the United Kingdom and what that was. So, when we give advice to the general population or the listeners, is there specific recommendations about what you should be having for your breakfast, in addition to it maybe being the biggest meal? Thinking around what's popular in this country and that maybe not being optimal.
So shall I reveal what the most popular breakfast was? So it was a cooked breakfast, which would include meat, often bacon or sausages, eggs, fried mushrooms, tomatoes, and maybe, we're in Scotland, so a tatty scone, potato scone, yeah.
Black pudding, maybe?
Black pudding, yes.
Iron brew?
So there is no public health advice around what constitutes a healthy breakfast. The public health advice that we have is the Eat Well Guide, which gives us a pictorial description of food groups that can be achieved over a week to maintain health. Nor is there public health advice what shift workers should be eating. I think there's definitely an evidence gap in there, and that's one of the reasons that creates my passion for the science that I do, that for me, doing internationally competitive science is really important, but the translation of that science into public health and into lifestyle medicine is also incredibly important to me. And I spend as much time thinking about the translation as I do getting the big grants and doing the science.
How does cereal fit into all of this? Because it seems to be a bit of a staple as well, but you have massive commercial interests.
So yes, breakfast cereals do have a part to play in a healthy breakfast, particularly I'm thinking for children and young people, because a lot of breakfast cereals are biofortified with vitamins and minerals, and that is so important for growing brains and growing youth. So it's just that the cereals that are high in sugar shouldn't feature every morning as a staple breakfast. They're more of a treat. So,
Got you. Now, you mentioned that having a bigger breakfast has like potential benefits about insulin. Maybe there's an element there around hunger. What do we understand about hunger? How it differs between people? Is it a willpower thing or is it genetic? What do we know?
First of all, I think we need to recognise that hunger is a construct. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that hunger is learned. So you have learned to associate the feelings of like your stomach rumbling and the noises of stomach rumbling. You've associated the feeling of maybe slight nausea and that is a feature of blood glucose dropping. So that's one of the known cues for recognising hunger. So hunger is something that you learn is the symptoms, and it is simply a cue to say, go and find something to eat. It's your body's way of giving that cue. Those signs and signals, so if we both said we're hungry just now, the choices of both the amount and type of food that we eat would be very different depending on the situation that we're in. So it's only a cue to initiate eating. It doesn't tell us how much you're going to eat and the choices you're going to make. And those choices that you're going to make is then what we call appetite. So you might have an appetite for something sweet. You might have an appetite for something salty.
So when someone says, I have a big appetite, or they say, wow, you have a big appetite, how much of that is learned? How much of it's like pre-programmed, hardwired?
So hunger is a feature of the changes in the different gut hormones, whether it's ghrelin, whether it's GLP-1, so whether it's the any of these, but also it's not just our physiology that drives hunger. We know that non-nutritional factors can be just as important. So an example is stress. So when I'm in a big lecture room, I'll get students to put up their hand and say, during exam time, do you eat more? Do you eat less? Or do you just not change your eating habits at all? And it roughly falls out that maybe 10 to 20% will not change their habits at all. And then we've got a 40% will eat more and 40% will eat less. That is so interesting, isn't it? So the same cue gives a different behavioural response. So that's just an example that there are many reasons that influence appetite, emotion, menstrual phase, hunger, time of day. You eat to fit in around a busy schedule. So you anticipate hunger and think, oh, I've got 10 minutes, I'll catch something to eat now because I know I'm not going to have time later. So it's so interesting that I really enjoy looking at this. And then I just want to mention before we leave this is the opposite to hunger is then fullness, because you can't really talk about hunger without talking about fullness because they're reciprocal. So many things that I'm looking at in hunger with the high protein diet work is trying to help people feel fuller for longer.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I have it in bold here, the hunger and fullness. So before we talk about fullness, just back to hunger, are some people more biologically hungry than others? Like, is there a genetic element to this? Or is it more environment driven, so to speak?
So there are diseases that are genetically driven that appear in young age that these patients feel have an insatiable hunger. So for sure, there are genetic components that will influence hunger. I've also said that hunger is learned. So the food environment that we're in has a huge part to play about the consequences of acting on that hunger. So I suppose the linked question to that is, are there differences in ways that hormones are expressed in different people? Yes. Can we easily know, whether you're a high expressor or a low expressor? No. But you can re-establish good eating habits to control those feelings of hunger.
How important is the choice of food and diet kind of construct when it comes to feeling full for longer or not, basically?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of work on high protein diets because protein is the most satiating macronutrient. Remember, the macronutrients are the energy providers, so protein, fat, carbohydrate, and alcohol. So in my research, I use high protein diets as my study diets, and they're nearly always around 30% calories coming from protein in a wide variety of sources that include, white meat and red meat and peas, beans, and pulses. So I've done a lot of work on the amount of protein, type of protein, timing of protein as a tool to help people lose weight.
Because I was thinking more around what we were saying earlier about the breakfast and construct, and I want to try and tie it to something which I think it was a phrase maybe you coined, which was like health inequality, or basically some of the work I've read of yours is linking social demographics with health, but it also links back to foods they can afford and so on. So is it fair to say then that what you eat has a significant effect on hunger, fullness, appetite? And if you have more protein, then maybe you feel less hungry if you ate the same amount of calories. Is it as simple as that?
No, I wish it was. That would help with my research, wouldn't it? So when I'm talking about high protein, there's different ways of thinking about that. So if you're talking about going to a supermarket and buying food, if it's more than 12% protein, it will be labelled high protein. High in protein. High protein is over 20%. So, and for my studies, when I said 30% protein, that is as a percentage of a weight loss diet. So the normal protein intake in the UK is around about 15% of calories. But I agree with you, the statement that what we eat does influence hunger, and I also agree that obesity is patterned in a way that is inequitable, so that if you live in an area of social deprivation, you're 5 times more likely to be living with overweight and obesity as a woman. And women are often gatekeepers of food for a household, for families. And that's what leads on to something called the paradox of obesity, that if I talk to you about somebody going to a food bank and visualise what that person might look like, you might visualise somebody who's underweight. But it's not just that, it's about embracing that people who have a low income and a low disposable income for their weekly food shop are then more likely to buy cheap foods, and those cheap foods are likely to have a poor nutritional content, high in calories, low in vitamins and minerals, and they're more susceptible to offers and promotions because they offer a low-cost option.
That's fascinating, isn't it? It's counterintuitive almost, because you think actually there's a scarcity of calories, maybe, but there's not. It sounds like there's a scarcity of quality. To
tackle that, we need to change our food environment. It's not about stigmatizing people who have low income. It's not about stigmatizing people who are living with overweight and obesity. It's about changing our food environment to make it easier to make those healthy choices.
Is that a supermarket thing or is it a government thing? Like, what's your perspectives as a leader in the space?
I've been leading up a grant over the last 4 years. It's called FIO Food, which is Food Insecurity and Obesity. And it's thinking about transforming the food system. That, for me, has involved working with retailers, supermarkets, and policymakers. So how can we restrict the unhealthy foods? So Scotland will have a bill coming into play in October later this year about restriction of high fat, sugar and salt foods. But it's not just that. We've had a lot of discussion just now with John Swinney announcing caps on food products in the retail space to try and make healthier foods more affordable. So there's not one solution here. It's about transforming our food system. And then it's not just about healthy foods either. Then I want to bring in that it should be environmentally sustainable as well. Because I think about not just about our own human health, but planetary health as well. And that makes it even more complicated.
In an ideal world, what would it all look like? If you had a magic wand or something that could change it all tomorrow, what would that food environment look like for kind of optimal success? And the reason I'm probing just a little bit is because there might be some listeners that say, well, I really like my Cadbury's Dairy Milk or equivalent, and I don't want to give that up. Or I love my fry up in the morning and so on. So how do we shift what could be decades of learned behavior and favorites?
It's not about giving up the treats, because that's part of enjoying food. Am I all about enjoying food? It's about making food more affordable and accessible to those on a low income. So poverty is a huge driver for some of these decisions. So I'll give you one example, that when women are on maternity leave, the maternity pay isn't the minimum wage. So at a time that they are feeding babies, and they might be breastfeeding or they might be buying formula, and we're not judging on that, but the cost of formula is so expensive, then it's subject to theft from supermarkets. Now, isn't that a terrible situation that you would have to resort to that to feed a baby? So that's just one solution, that if you tackled poverty and income in that vulnerable time of a woman's life, then it may be that they would be able to afford to feed the family better during that period of time.
Yeah, and maybe there's probably a second and third order effect, which is if baby is undernourished, then that must have consequences.
So we know the first
later.
1,000 days of a child's life is incredibly important to establish risks later on, health risks later on in life.
That's so interesting. Now, I'd like to take us back a little bit to the kind of biology of hunger and fullness, if you don't mind. In particular, you mentioned some of these gut hormones. Could you maybe just explain to the listener at a higher kind of level how the gut communicates with the brain? And I know it's immensely complicated, but
there is something.
There's a connection.
Yeah, so there is something called gut-brain axis, and I call it the food-gut-brain axis in this context. So the food that we eat is digested and absorbed throughout different processes, but for example, the vagus nerve will send signals directly into the brain. Some of the metabolites will also be neurotransmitters and go directly across the blood-brain barrier to change the way that they're expressed in the brain. So when the timing of food and the type of food and the amount of food that we eat will continuously have consequences in terms of metabolites that are produced in response to eating or in response to not eating, because we touched on fasting. So those hunger signals that we touched on earlier are cues saying you're not eating enough. The human body has evolved to defend body weight, to be ready to fight that saber-toothed tiger in times of fasting. So these are all normal processes that are part of the human body that are there to maintain our survival. And that's why weight loss is difficult, because you're fighting against our human biology, that we should maintain energy coming in to maintain our ability to run away from that threat. So, and that's why negative energy balance, losing weight, is difficult, because you're working against those signals.
Now, in terms of the signals, do you think some people have an easier time than others, insofar as they may have less strong a signal, or for some reason they've got better willpower?
Let's stick with the signals. So the answer is yes, people will probably have different abilities to increase or decrease their hormone response to meals. But in science, what we tend to do, and me included, is we get a bunch of people in, do a randomized control trial, and say, compare high protein versus high fibre, and then come out with a conclusion. Don't tend to look at what we call responders and non-responders, and we don't. And I certainly don't do what's called N=1 studies, where I look at an individual across a period of time. So in science, I think we do have a lot to learn about individual response, but when I'm doing my research, it's often for policy, and we're thinking about public health advice, not advice to give an individual. So we're not there really with the NHS, are we? Even if you wanted to find out as an individual, maybe in 100 years' time, when you're born, you'll not only get a blood test, but at certain stages of life, you'll get questionnaires and say, this is your genetic profile, you're going to be predisposed to this disease and this disease, so please adapt your dietary intake to take account of this. So we don't have that individualised dietary advice, and we don't have that individualised lifestyle medicine approach.
Yeah. So I guess if we were to wave the magic wand, maybe we would have some of that in addition to the environment. What would be some of the highest yield, highest impact public health interventions to kind of improve how we eat and body weight and so on across Scotland? Yeah,
so having a healthy weight is important, and we live in what we call an obesogenic environment that's easy to gain weight and difficult to lose weight. So I understand that that's not always achievable, but healthy weight would be one.
I'll just press you a little bit on the obesogenic environment. What does that mean?
It means that we live in an environment where there's a plentiful supply of cheap food 24 hours a day. So I'm old enough to remember when shops were shut on a Sunday, and now the supermarkets are open 24 hours, and as long as you have money to go and buy food, it's available.
And how much emphasis do you place on? So, for example, you go and fill up your car, and invariably here and also in America, which I frequently travel to, you have to kind of sometimes go through this maze of items before you, and then even when you go to pay, it's all there in your face. Sometimes it even goes one step further, which is these bars, take your pick, are actually on offer. Would you like 2 for 40p? It won't be that cheap these days, but so how impactful is that? Or is that just small beer basically in the context of everything else?
In Scotland, we're not going to have that anymore. So we're not going to have the bug off offers, buy one, get one free. And product placement will be shifted, and that's for the larger food retailers. So that's by law, that's the regulations that come out on the 1st of October. So about product placement and promotions and meal deals in store. So that's already in place in England. Scotland will be later this year. So that will remove that temptation at the at till points and specific areas in store.
That sounds like good news.
It will, and we've done an evaluation. That's some of the work that I've done in the FIO Food Grant to show that it does have an impact. So 1 million items sold less per day is the evaluation that we showed looking at data across the UK. Yes. So I mean, this was taken out to help move the population towards healthier weight, to manage the obesity and overweight epidemic. So yeah, this is a positive step forward. However, some of your listeners might say, well, that's a nanny state. But it's individual choice. You'll still be able to go and buy your Cadbury's chocolate bar, but it just won't be in the position right in front of your face.
It's just not directly in your face. Well, that's a real positive then. I didn't appreciate it would be that much. That's kind of crazy. In America, it's also interesting because if you look at some of the things that are being sold, which I do just out of general interest, I kind of got to the point where I'm not enticed by it. I don't drink fizzy drinks. It's just because for years I've not done it and I don't crave it anymore. But you can look on the back of some of these juices and stuff. It says, big bold letters, contains 0% natural ingredients or that kind of thing. Like Fanta contains no juice from a fruit. It's just chemicals. So maybe we're actually taking several steps in the positive direction here. Placement, and we've got additional regulation, it sounds like.
Yes.
Which is really, really good. So I'd like to maybe just move us on a little bit to protein again, which I know is a favorite subject for you. But before I do so, you mentioned alcohol was one of the macronutrients.
So alcohol, because it contains energy. So it's not, I'm not saying it's part of a healthy diet, but those are the 4 macronutrients that give us energy. So in terms of appetite, alcohol is known to be a stimulant of appetite.
Do you have any perspectives on alcohol and how that fits into a healthy, balanced diet or not?
So I could perhaps share the Mediterranean diet, and sort of red wine makes a feature in that public health advice associated with the Mediterranean diet, as does olive oil, whole grains, fresh fruits and vegetables, being physically active. So these are all features of a healthy diet, but it's in moderation.
Yeah, I follow that sort of story really closely, and for a while it was, if it's in true moderation, so probably less than 14 units a week for a male, then it may have a health benefit, but that may be because it's a kind of social thing that makes you more relaxed.
Yes. So that's interesting because you've got something called the blue zones, which are the areas in the world that you've got the most people who are living to 100 years plus. And social integration, a feeling of belonging, is even more important than your body mass index at that age. So I think I'm fascinated by blue zones, and I would love to go and visit one of them.
Yeah. So basically, I think what we're saying is, within the Mediterranean diet, it's encouraged, or it's just part of the definition. Red wine features.
Part of their evidence base about which dietary components contribute to longevity, and good health. So, and then you could say, well, there's obviously compounds in the red wine. It doesn't have to be in red wine. You could get them in other sources. Yes. So dark chocolate.
It's interesting because some people say, actually, total abstinence is the best thing for your body because it's class 1 carcinogen and it's a neurotoxin. But very often you also hear, actually, 1 glass of wine.
But when you visit these Mediterranean countries and join in with their culture, the glass of wine is often at lunchtime with a large meal, and then you go home, have a siesta, so have the sleep, which is very nice in the hottest hours of the day, and then join up with work colleagues later in the day and eat your tapas, your small meals. So it's part of the culture.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. It's interesting how kind of the norms when it comes to food differ so much between countries. Is that something you've looked at much? Like, mentioned Spain, they have a very different approach.
So I was fortunate enough to get funding from the EU sort of 2015 up to 2020 and worked across different EU partners, and it was amazing. I learned a lot about how to work within a team, how to develop my science. It was very formative for me, and visiting the different countries means you get to sample their cultural foods. So, going to Scandinavia, I wasn't too pleased with reindeer on the menu, but there are many other, positive memories that I have around sharing food with different EU partners. So.
Yeah, and the sort of the time that people eat is very different too. Because whenever I had this debate with my wife, I would always point to the blue zones and say, well, hey, look, they're having a glass of wine and their dinner sometimes at 9, sometimes at 10. I mean, I went to this event in France last month, and I eat early now, and I'm in bed early. Some boring guy. And dinner started at 9. I thought, I can't cope. I'm usually in bed at 9. So if I eat at 9, I'm going to be in bed at midnight and I'm going to feel full. But it's kind of normal over there. Have you got any thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, that is a different cultural approach. And you need to think about in context, what did they eat and what time did they start in the morning? I suspect that they weren't up at 5 or 6 in the morning, and that the culture starts later in the morning. So when somebody says to me, when I get up in the morning and I don't feel hungry, I counter that by saying, what time did you have your last meal? And what did you have? Because often people who don't feel hungry in the morning are eating late. So the two kind of go hand in hand.
On the blue zones then, what's your view on what makes them so special and unique? We're talking about areas where people live to like 100 plus, like centurions basically.
For sure, there is a genetic component to that, because a lot of these are discrete communities who have shared their genetic profile over a period of time. So I think genetics is a huge driver of that. But the food environment and their physical activity level is also a huge component of what promotes good health.
And do you know if people move to a blue zone, do they get the benefit, or do you have to be like born there? Or?
So then the genetics would have less of a part, and the environment that they're in would have a more positive impact in terms of perhaps reducing an existing risk. So whether you're joining, a community where you're supported and your meals are provided for you and you've got something to look forward to when you wake up in the morning. All these are really positive features of health, mental health as well.
Now back to protein. Why is protein more satiating than alcohol, fat, or carbohydrate?
So that's a really good question. It's not really understood, but I will try my best to break that down. So proteins are made up of amino acids. The amino acids, you can have essential and non-essential amino acids. And those amino acids, some of them will enter the brain, and that will cause satiety. So the feeling of fullness. So partly probably because of the amino acid profile. So I've done some work changing amino acids. Partly through the metabolism, partly that protein slows gastric emptying, and that gastric emptying then impacts on the gut hormones such as GLP-1. So we know that is expressed through consumption of protein. So there are lots of, I think of it as like a Venn diagram. There are lots of different mechanisms in place in the human body that all come together to signal that the body is full. It doesn't need to eat anymore.
Do you, just to kind of test the concepts a little bit further, do you know if you take amino acids as supplements, you get a satiating effect, or is it something about the physical breakdown of protein?
Yeah, so I vividly remember many years ago doing a study where we did feed amino acids in the form of red meat. So we gave subjects red meat to eat versus amino acids. So these amino acids are not very nice. Some of them are sulfur containing, they taste vile. So that was very difficult to feed that, and we ended up putting it into a sorbet because the freezing process helped mask the flavours with citrus flavours. Anyway, so this was a sorbet study in my brain. When I think about this, it was a difficult study to run, but to answer your question, no, the meat was more satiating than what we call the free amino acids. It is that process of digestion and absorption that influence satiety more. And the same could be said that if you drink protein in a liquid form, it is not as satiating as a solid form. So, because that solid form delays gastric emptying as well.
Which brings me on to something I think quite topical, not GLPs, that'll come in a bit, is the, you'll have seen it, there's various different companies doing it now. It's like, they basically say, you don't need to eat food at all. You just need to drink 3 of these a day. And you're sorted. One of the companies, I think I can name them, Huel, grew incredibly quickly. And I think they were sold, or there was a significant investment, and there was a huge amount of money associated with that. Now, I'm not talking specifically about Huel, it could be any of these. What does the science say about these liquid-only diets?
I mean, they're convenient. When you are rushing out the door in the morning to get to work with kids in the car and busy schedule, bang, 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 meetings all day, when you're going to get time to sit down, you can see the convenience of having a high protein drink, and it's got added vitamins and minerals. And because it's quick to eat, it's satiating and convenient. Cost, I think, is going to be an issue, that you have to have a disposable income that you can afford to have that. So as a meal replacement 3 times a day, then I would wonder why you wouldn't want to eat real food. Is it because it's convenient? Is it because you can't be bothered cooking? Is it really because you enjoy that, genuinely prefer that over real food? So, because food is not just about nutrients. We eat food for enjoyment. We eat food because it's culturally acceptable.
And has been since forever, probably.
I always say we are all experts in food because we all do it. Are some people using this as a tool to lose weight? Are they using it as like a meal replacement strategy so that they can lose weight? And you can see that then that becomes easy to pick up the bottle because you don't have to count calories, you don't have to faff around with figuring out what you need to eat and how much and weigh it.
Yes. I think it's probably all of the above. I was coming more at it from and we've not used this word yet, I don't think, ultra-processed food type angle. And because they are expensive. And I've always thought, you're paying so much money for this ultra-processed food with lots of artificial sweetener and stuff like that in it. Is it really good? So can we talk a little bit about the ultra-processed food side of things? Because I'd imagine that these are classified as ultra-processed because they're like powders. How big a problem are ultra-processed foods in the context of this obesogenic environment? I shouldn't ask 2 at once, I shouldn't, but I just have to. Is there a universally accepted definition for ultra-processed?
Let's cover that first. So the answer to that is no. So SACN is the government's body, which is Scientific Advisory Committee for Nutrition, that looked at ultra-processed foods. They've looked at them twice. And they have said that there are different definitions in use globally, but the one that is most commonly used is the NOVA categories. NOVA is not an acronym, it's just NOVA. And it's categorised 1, 2, 3 and 4, and ultra-processed foods is category 4. So SACN have said, in the absence of a better definition, this was developed in Brazil, and that's the one that's most commonly applied to categorise foods. So when we look at the evidence for ultra-processed foods, category 4, on weight gain, we can see that people who gain weight are more likely to consuming ultra-processed foods. In fact, ultra-processed foods represent around about 60% of energy intake in the UK. So it's substantial. Yes, 60. So it's a substantial proportion. Now, my stance on this from a public health point of view is that there is not enough evidence to categorically say it's something about the ultra-processing rather than the nutritional content, which often is high fat, sugar and salt, calories, per se. So keep calm, because I don't want to scare people by thinking, going back through your head, what did I eat for breakfast, lunch and dinner, and am I eating 60% ultra-processed food? It's not about scaring people, and we don't want public health advice to scare people. So Indeed. Do we categorically know that eating high fat, high sugar, high calorie foods will be a risk factor for weight gain? Yes, we do. And additives and preservatives, in some instances, make food safer. Like those drinks are on the shelf and ambient temperature because they've got those additives, emulsifiers. So, and, we live in Scotland. I always think, we've used salting and adding sugar to foods. So salting fish and adding sugar to our soft fruits, so that we have fish and fruit to eat all year round. And it's a method of preserving food.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent the last 10 years working on stabilizing microbes at ambient temperature without salt and sugar.
The preservatives that are in food are there for a reason to make food safer. If we decided to remove them, we would have unsafe food, potentially, and more food waste, which would impact on our planetary footprint, environmental footprint. So then we come back to, as a scientist, I am interested in ultra-processed food. I've just written a big grant, keeping toes and fingers crossed. Yes, and to look at whether it's processing per se or whether it's the nutritional value of food.
So you'll have to get people in and control what they eat 100%.
Yes, so we'll be doing a randomised trial across the UK, hopefully, fingers crossed. That's one component, but also looking at the footprint of ultra-processed food, because many of the non-animal or plant-based alternatives are ultra-processed by default. And we'll be doing a citizen science approach, so involving the general public in that as well. So
it's more nuanced than I thought. I thought you were, I'll be honest, I thought you were going to say categorically ultra-processed foods are, but it's more nuanced than that, I think.
But no, I just know that the mechanistic evidence is not there. There are only a handful, I can count in one hand how many trials there are. Yes. So Kevin Hall started this work a few years ago in his study looking at processed and less processed food and showed weight gain. So, but there's a lot of criticism in that study, and Kevin himself acknowledges that, about the energy density of the diet and the role of texture. And
I can't believe there's only 5. Because there's been many books written about the subject. It's so
well. It's a very it's an emotive subject, and people have strong views. And I think we just need to say, what do the experts say? SAC and say there isn't enough evidence.
That's fascinating. But as I said, I'm doing this talk tomorrow, and they've asked me to talk about all these cutting-edge microbiome therapeutic approaches, which I will do. But one of my earlier slides is basically, you need a foundation, and one of the foundational elements is eat real food. But maybe I need to be a bit more nuanced, and I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit. The jury's still out, but hopefully, if you get your grant, the question will be addressed. What is your hypothesis, actually? Can you share that?
So the main question is around whether it's processing per se or the nutrition content of food that promotes weight gain. So.
And of course, you're a scientist, so you're going to test the hypothesis. Do you have a sense of what's more important at this stage?
No, otherwise I wouldn't be doing the study. I would be, I think as a scientist, you've got to have a hypothesis, but you've got to sit, I've got a foot either side of the fence, as it were. I'm sitting on the fence. And when I speak about my science, it's evidence-based. So we will be looking at the evidence and creating new evidence through our trials, and just come back in 4 years.
Fair enough. So speaking about Scotland, maybe specifically for a little bit, how do we fare as a nation versus others?
Unfortunately, that's not good news. The Scottish diet is one of the worst in the world. Yes.
In the world?
Yes. So we fail to meet our dietary goals, our dietary targets consistently. So we eat too much sugar, too much salt. We have 60% of the population collectively overweight and obese, and that's concerning when you have children. We don't eat enough dietary fibre. So yes, we've got some way to go to improve the Scottish diet. And it's ironic because Scotland has some of the best food in the world, with our Scottish smoked salmon, our Aberdeen Angus beef, our berries, our shellfish. So we should have resources to eat healthily. Most of that is exported, and we import most of our fresh fruit and veg.
So our best foods go elsewhere, basically, for the most part. Is that because expensive restaurant in Paris says we want the Aberdeen Angus beef? So it's interesting. So any idea why Scotland is faring so poorly on the global stage?
That's quite a big question. Yeah. So culture is part of that, I think, and thinking about food in terms of how much we eat as offering good value for money rather than thinking what is the quality. So when I'm thinking about beef, I'm thinking about the message is eat a smaller amount, but eat a better quality cut of beef. So to fit with the current advice to reduce risks for colorectal cancer. So
that's another fascinating topic, which is probably massive. The colorectal cancer risk with red meat, is it red meat per se, or is it the cut, or is it?
So the advice is around reducing meat intake to 70 grams a day. So that's particularly for people who consume over that amount. And you've touched on bacon. Yes, bacon is cured, and that curing or smoking process also makes it a carcinogen. So we have these scary headlines around eating bacon will kill you or take X amount of years off your life. But that's for a lot of cured and smoked foods. So it's not just bacon.
So the advice would be less red meat, as high quality as you can.
Particularly less processed meat.
Yeah, as high quality as you can, and no smoked.
Yes, if you're willing to give up your bacon.
That's going to be a tough one for many people.
Mm-hmm. The bacon butty goes out the window.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about weight loss. And one of the big questions I've got kind of noted down here is, why is long-term weight loss so challenging? In
my head, just to recap, so we've talked a lot about public health, and public health is to help prevent people weight gain. And then we can talk a little bit about weight loss treatment. Of course, we're probably going to want to speak about GLP-1. And then those are tools, those new injectables are tools to help people lose weight, very effective. But they're for a distinct period of time and only work while you're taking them. The challenge then, as you said, is how do you keep the weight off? And there's some recent data from Cambridge group, Oxford group, beg your pardon, showing that most people who take these injectables will regain the weight over a 2-year period. So, yes. So, and that's because by habit, people go back to their old eating habits.
I mean, I have quite is it a utopian or dystopian vision for what might work. So if I was on the panel that you're on with all the experts, my suggestion, and you're probably going to shoot it down, but what would happen if we encouraged everybody, I mean like kind of literally everybody, to go on a low, like an ultra low dose or a low dose of semaglutide, Ozempic, Wegovy, whatever you want to call it, and just stay on it forever? Is that a thing? Is that or am I in cuckoo land?
It's a thing if you Google microdosing. Yeah. Yes, so that is what you're describing. So the prescriptions for these hormones, so like Manjaro is the dual hormones. So Ozempic has one, is just GLP-1. So they're actually different. As we progress through science and delivering these drugs, whether it's injectables or tablets, every time there comes more advanced and more effective. So the question is, should we be microdosing? There isn't enough evidence on microdosing. So the answer for me as an evidence-based scientist is no, but let's see where those trials have not been done yet. They are being done in animal models. I've not seen any data in human models yet. There's anecdotal evidence of people telling me that they're microdosing to maintain a stable body weight. But remember, these drugs do seem to offer the holy grail of dieting, that they work independent of weight loss as well, and they have other positive effects on health around modulating inflammatory response, reducing cardiovascular risk, etc. So yes, they do seem to offer a really positive way forward for managing lifelong health. I don't think it will be injectable. Surely your microdosing will be, I could see a scenario that you're given a blue pill to eat before eating to reduce how much you eat. And then after eating, you have the green pill that will help modulate the metabolic effects of what you've just eaten. That's my kind of scenario and is that acceptable? Do you think that would be socially acceptable?
I mean, I'm probably the wrong person to ask. I'm extremely excited about that as a concept. I am super optimistic about the future of these peptides. And I can think of no more transformative medicine. Maybe antibiotics, maybe certain cancer therapies. I mean, just hearing you say that makes, as a leader in this space, makes me very, very excited. Because I do think it's the holy grail. I do think we've cracked it. And I think the general population is several years behind, just in terms of adoption, and acceptability is a huge point that I think you're raising. Most people will not say openly that they're taking Ozempic, Wegovy, take your pick. It's only the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who are microdosing who are open about their GLP-1 agonist use.
So I think that's more in the US then. There's a huge proportion of the US are using that in the format that you're describing. But that, to me, worries me because that embraces social inequalities. It means that only those that have the finances to pay for those drugs to inject once a week can get that. And that means that on a public health perspective, that it just creates an even wider dietary health inequalities. Because, so for example, in NHS Grampian, it's only those that have type 2 diabetes that are going to be offered these drugs on the NHS, and in special circumstances, those with metabolic consequences of obesity that are going to be offered. that means that microdosing schedule is not, the NHS don't have enough funds to support that, or even if it's considered on a regional basis.
It's so fascinating though, isn't it? Because if everybody took them, there may be less of an economic burden on the NHS overall. Because, I mean, First Minister Swinney, if you're listening, maybe the government can fund GLPs for everybody.
Where would that money come from, though? What would we have to lose?
Well,
these are not things that we can solve just now, but
I did a little bit of work on this with somebody else very briefly, and indeed, where does the budget come from to finance? How many people do we have in this country? 8 million, doses every month. But if you were pitching to the drug companies, maybe there could be a deal done. They get access to the data to support countrywide adoption. And it's more about the long-term investment in what kind of savings would it generate over time. How much more productive are people? What happens to chronic disease? It's a very bold vision for the future. But your question is the most fundamental question, I think, which is how does it get funded initially? And that's a difficult one.
So yeah, I mean, you have seen discussion around treating obesity. It doesn't say, let's not say how, could increase workforce productivity. So I agree with that. It's just how would you manage that? And of course, obesity is progressive. It is a disease and it's relapsing. We've touched on all of that. So these drugs only work while you're taking them. So that would mean that you have a lifetime commitment to taking a drug to manage a healthy body weight.
Yeah, I think the vision, I think we share the same vision actually. I think that kind of capsule in the morning vision becomes a reality in 5 or 10 years where there's genericization and the cost per tablet comes down to a very, very low figure because the competition's so fierce and there's no patent protection anymore.
If I wanted to give you a counter view,
yeah, please.
Then what you're doing here is coming back to making obesity about the individual. And what I've said is that I think we should be spending all that money on changing our food environment and sorting out poverty. If we sorted that out, you would not need these lifelong drugs. So I think these just offer different viewpoints, and it's interesting to discuss this. And I don't want to say whether one of us is right or wrong, but there are different views of thinking about how to manage obesity. But rather than saying that it's around trying to change an individual's behaviour.
On the microdosing of the animal studies, is there weight loss?
No, so it's independent weight loss. It's about keeping weight stable.
Got you. Stable weight. Do you get these other benefits like insulin sensitivity?
Yes.
And you maintain your muscle?
Yeah.
It's a holy grail.
Mm.
So in the future, we're all going to be on a microdose.
I think there's going to be a Nobel Prize for Jens Holst. That's my prediction. He will get a Nobel Prize in medicine at some point. Yeah. I hope he...
Sorry, for the listener, he is the...
Oh, he is based in Denmark. So the originator. He did all the original work on GLP-1s. Uh-huh.
He may get the Nobel Prize in medicine because he's basically solved one of the biggest problems.
Well, he's produced a drug in a format that is deliverable and has got a really good safety profile. As with any positive health medical intervention, then it's going to develop over the next few years. So
we've gone from one agonist or a single receptor to a dual and our triple with Reta. So in the future, we're going to have 4, 5, 6, 7.
So is it like a scenario of, have your cake and eat it? So we should never forget, when you're speaking to dietitians tomorrow, we should never forget that that our nutritional intake is really important, and that people who are taking these drugs have obviously a much reduced intake, but and therefore the quality of their intake is even more important to maintain muscle mass and to maintain features of that diet to avoid diseases of undernutrition that you would associate with undernutrition.
Gotcha. So basically, watch this space.
More evidence and more work on nutrient intake, dietary patterns.
Is this, just going back to one of the earlier points, is the solution to the muscle loss on the GLPs just eat more protein and lift some weights?
It's part of the solution for sure. So that is already part of the dietary advice that we see, and there's evidence on that. But people have to be able to translate that into their own lifestyle and practice. So, which is challenging.
I have a couple of friends who are entrepreneurs in the what should I say, the supplement business, and they have a saying at the moment, which is fiber is the new protein.
Mm-hmm.
What do they mean by that? For a long time, protein supplementation, bars, drinks, pills, powders has been the thing. But now the thing is fiber, drinks, supplements, pills, so on and so forth. We've not spoken about fiber much in the episode just yet. So maybe we can do a little bit of a fiber deep dive. What is it? Why is it important? How important is it? Is it nuanced? Like, should everyone just eat more fiber, or?
Yeah, so in the UK, most of us do not eat enough dietary fibre, and dietary fibre has had a bit of a sort of negative press, in that fibre was linked to creating bulk in the diet and to help avoid constipation. And, you know, as a scientist who routinely collects stool samples from individuals, then I know that it creates the yuck factor when we talk about looking at the gut microbiome and what appears out the other end when in the stool samples, which is a proxy for what's going on inside the body. So, but fibre is incredibly important, has such an important role in promoting good health. So some of the most recent work that I've done is looking at the role of the gut microbiome in patients in the care home environment with Alzheimer's disease. I've just published some work looking at a direct comparison of high protein weight loss diets versus high fibre. And we showed that protein is superior for satiety and satiation, but fibre is superior for promoting indices of gut health. So I guess then it depends what your goals are. I've also sitting on some work looking at the interaction between dietary fibre and non-nutritive sweeteners. So it's going to be really... So artificial sweeteners, that's what we can call them as well. So looking at how that consumption of a specific type of artificial sweetener might impact on the gut microbiome. Because if you think about public health again, that we eat too much sugar, I've said that. So we have a sugar levy to have sugary drinks more expensive, or an alternative would be reformulation of drinks to maintain that sweetness, but have artificial sweeteners or non-nutritive sweeteners as a food additive. So if we consume that, then doesn't mean that it impacts on the gut microbiome.
And is there a link between the artificial sweeteners and the microbiome?
So the short answer to that is it depends. It depends which sweetener we're talking about. Okay. So, but yeah, I'm more than happy to share that when I've got that paper published. So I'm beavering away at that right now. But it gives you an example of some of the things that, that I'm really interested in reducing that fibre gap that we see in the population, how can we encourage people to eat more dietary fibre?
We'll have to have you back when we get the artificial sweetener information, because in terms of requests from listeners, it's one of the top. It's one of the top requests.
Okay, well...
what's the best or the worst artificial sweetener, and should I just avoid them altogether? And the response has always been, we don't quite know yet. Maybe stevia, I'm not trying to push you, maybe I am a little bit, but maybe stevia is better than aspartame and sucralose.
They're all just artificial sweeteners, though, aren't they? At the end of the day, it's like it's honey, or is a natural sugar any better, and it's still a form of sugar. So, yeah.
True. It's true. I could make the case for honey, though. I think
honey's got other
I could make the case for honey, but you're
other
right.
compounds that are health promoting. Yeah, it's just an added sugar. Yeah.
Okay, good. So, I mean, this has been amazing. We've covered breakfast, protein, GLPs, health inequality, the paradox of obesity. It'd be great to kind of wrap up with, maybe you could give a bit of a vision for the future. Where do you hope we are in 5 or 10 years with some of the research and work that you're doing? What do you hope to achieve from the translational aspects that you were referring to at the start?
So I would like to see more dietary advice for shift workers on healthy eating, healthy lifestyle, about supporting people who work shifts. So that would be great if we can have an evidence base for shift workers. And I would like to see for older adults as well, I'd like to see development of better guidelines and update of the protein recommendations. I don't think they are high enough to support healthy aging, and we have an aging population. There's more people aged over 60 than we have aged 18 and a half. So we have that aging population, and we need to work longer into our older age to support ourselves. So I would like to see a redress of that around protein recommendations. So, yeah, and I suppose I'm really excited about the work that we're doing in ultra-processed food that will better understand whether it's processing per se, or whether it's the nutritional content of those processed foods that contribute to weight gain.
Alex, thanks so much. Amazing episode. If the listeners want to follow you, where are they best to find your work and your research?
So I try and share my findings on LinkedIn. So that's probably the best place to find me.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.